What's up? Welcome to the unofficial Tedeschi Trucks podcast. This is episode number, 240, 230. I am Adam Choi. To follow this show, it's at Tedeschi Trucks podcast on Instagram and on YouTube. Just you're there already. If you're watching, we are live. Please subscribe and do all that for sure. Like, subscribe, share, do all that. That's definitely appreciated. 100%. I will be putting out an audio version of this episode as well. I'll probably get that out later tonight, tomorrow, the latest. I would think I'll get that up too, because I know you guys like to listen to. I'm on Spotify, Apple Podcast, all the places for sure. What else? Weedside, Woodside, that's a great dispensary in the New York City area in Queens. That's Randy's spot, big supporter of this show. Definitely check that out. If you're in the New York City, Queens area, all the links to all this information is below in the episode description for sure. What else we got? There's a Discord as well if you want to join. I appreciate that. The link is below. Should be in the description as well for that. Do I got that in there? I think I got that in there. If not, I'll add that in at some point. I'll add that in too. Patreon.com is another way to support. Patreon.com/TTB podcast. Thank you, Kathleen, Stacy, Troy, Daniel, Bo, Marion. Appreciate the support most certainly. And if you join at the second two tiers, portion of your contribution will get donated to the Mr. Holland's Opus Foundation, supporting music education. I love what they do, donating instruments and providing resources to kids all over the country and cities all over the country. They do great work. But we are here today to talk about the Gregg Allman documentary. It is released now online on Apple, on Apple and on Amazon Prime and all the places you can view it. Actually, before I want to get into it, I just wanted to wish Susan Tedeschi, Miss Susan Tedeschi Trucks, get well soon. I know she had her appendix surgery, I believe. From what I gather, I think she's doing okay. And the band did have to cancel a couple of shows, but they will be back soon with new shows coming up, and I'll be recapping all those. Reach out to me if you're going to more shows coming up this summer. I would love to chat with you and recap those. I try to recap every single episode I can of Tedeschi Trucks Band, of course, because I can't be at every show, but I want to feel like I was there through the stories and anecdotes and all, and the recaps and all that. I appreciate you guys joining me on that. What else we got? What else? I think that's pretty much my spiel there. I do want to let me get my banner going here. I got a banner here. Let's see here. Ways to support it. I'm going to get that going. But I do want to bring on a couple of guests here to talk about this documentary. We got Bob Beatty coming back here, author of Play All Night, Duane Allman and the Journey to the Fillmore East. Multiple time guest, of course. Appreciate him. We're going to get him on momentarily, as well as Michael Drum, the producer, director of True Colors, his 2003 documentary. So without further ado, let's bring him on. What is up, guys? Are we here? There's one of them, and there's the other. What's cracking, my friends?
Hey, Adam.
I see you when I hear you. How we doing, Bob?
Sir.
You're there, and we're actually are we simulcasting on your Bob,
yeah.
on your
greetings
outlet as well?
Yeah, greetings to the Long Live the ABB audience, Long Live the ABB.com audience. We are, and I've got it running in the background, Adam, successfully, better than when I did it with John Linsky a couple of weeks ago, talking also about this documentary. Very cool. So we're good. We're good to go. Yes, sir.
I enjoyed the documentary. I don't know where to start. I feel like you guys are the Allman Brothers experts, and I appreciate you guys joining me for sure. So maybe I'll just kick it over to where should we start? Should we go in chronological order? Should we just talk about reactions? I don't really have a plan. I have some notes here. I was watching a little bit more of it this morning to keep it fresh in my mind, but I'll give it to one of you guys, and you guys could just jump in.
I want to hear Bob's perspective, because he's deep in the weeds with all this.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael and Adam both. So I saw it twice. I thought it was on, they made this thing one day only, and it came to Nashville. I saw it. I think I told you, Adam, offline, Gabe Dixon was in the audience with his wife, which I thought was just, it's like, there you go. Even on your day off, you're going to go learn about the band that you're a part of, this family that you are a part of. My first time watching it is like the first time I listen to a record or read a book or watch a film. I've come with my own expectations. In some ways, it becomes a little challenging sometimes to let them go. I know Gregg's story. I love Gregg's story. I revere Gregg Allman as an artist. I've written a book about Duane and the Duane era, which got a lot of play in the movie and really made me happy. That's one thing that all four of those guys carried with them when Duane Allman died, was they were carrying Duane's spirit, and none more than Gregg. None of them more than Gregg. And that came through, which was great. I saw it the second time and was able to appreciate it more as what the filmmaker was trying to do, what Keach was doing, how they laid the story out. I felt the first time, for example, no complaints at all about how they handled the Scooter Herring thing. It was like, I'm really glad it was in there. I was surprised. Surprised is the wrong word. You can't talk about Gregg's story and not talk about what happened in 1975, 76, when he got popped by the feds. But it was in there, and it was as honest as you're going to have in a documentary that is praising somebody. I thought, one of the things with Gregg always for me, Gregg and my younger brother, share a birthday. And my younger brother struggled with drugs and alcohol his entire life until he overdosed. I always felt for Brian what I felt for Gregg was, man, if you could just get it together for a little bit and get rid of that. And Gregg, I tell you, the way he looked and talked about alcohol, he wasn't talking about heroin. He wasn't talking about cocaine. He looked and he said alcohol was the one that really got him. Well, my brother was a drug addict and alcoholic. My sister was an alcoholic, died of alcoholism. I was really struck by how honest that part was. So, again, you're gonna gloss over some of the bad parts of somebody's personality in a documentary that they are involved in. I get that. I don't think it was bad. I thought it was good choices. One last point, Devin talking about, actually it's 2 points from Devin. The first one was when he says Chank thought he lost both Duane and Gregg on the same day. And a lot of people said, where'd that come from? Like, Gregg overdosed the night Duane died. And I was like, no, that's spelled out pretty well in Galadriel's book from now 12 years ago, 2014. I pulled it out actually and shared it with somebody who was doubting it. And I said, no, it's here. The second one was when the Devin's interviewer said, but he never said, I'm sorry to Devin. And Devin just goes, he lived a lifetime of I'm sorry's. And that is what it's like to be the son of an alcoholic. And my father was also a recovering alcoholic. It's what it's like to be the brother of an addict, an alcoholic. I felt it deeply, So, again, told the breadth of his story. I think there was one glaring absence in the voices who spoke. I'm sure we will talk about that later. I thought JMO, every time JMO was on, I either giggled or smiled because he's JMO, but when he goes, no, but one motherfucker in this band that can sing, and I'm like, that quote is in my book. That Play All Night, Duane Allman and the Journey to Fillmore East. So, Michael, then I found, then your footage emerges like kind of out of this, like it went online and somehow I found this magical time capsule from, really when Gregg had put it back together. And that's the last piece I want to say. Those last 20 years of Gregg's life, maybe the last 15, was not, as Alan Paul will say, a straight line through sobriety in the manner that we understand that. But man, once he got off the hard stuff and decided he was going to continue to stay off it, that's where I feel like the documentary gave that part of his life a really nice ending, because going into it, man, when I saw that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that one got me twice, seeing him up there slurring and being barely able to speak at the Rock Hall of Fame. And that was a gut punch. It was a gut punch. And then, so there you go. There's my quick take. I really did think it was good. I will quibble, but there's people who quibble about my book too. What is it? It's not my movie. I appreciate it for what it was. I really do.
You know what the gut punch was for me? I mean, seeing him not doing well and kind of stumbling and trying to hold it together on stage, that was sad to see. But when he revealed and he was saying all the people that he wanted to thank, he wanted to thank his mom, he wanted to thank Duane, he wanted whoever, all these lists of people, and he never got to that, and that's painful. And I appreciate you sharing some of your journey and your story and your family, Bob. And no one wants to suffer from addiction. No one wants to be in this situation. And I would gather that it's sort of this vicious cycle where you don't want to be in this situation, but so to avoid it, you're kind of just going through this like cycle again. It's like
there's a whole Adam. There's an entire psychology to it that you don't really understand until you are confronted with it, either in your own life, like personally, or with your siblings. And, with my brother, who's 8 years younger than I, man, it was like, Jesus Christ, dude, can you just once not fuck up and ruin your own life or mess with my parents? I see Michael nodding too. Like it is a cycle. And then Brian eventually tells me later in life, he wasn't happy when he was out using. He felt shame. So Gregg's only relief from 1971, October 29th, 1971, until the end of his life, right, where he was truly released from the pain, or for much of that part, was on stage performing music. But there's another 20 hours in the day, man. 20, and addicts and alcoholics, because they're driven, especially those driven to create, fill that void with substances. Then you add PTSD, the dizzying level of fame. Michael, you know better than I, because you've run a lot more with the famous folk or been around them. I kind of hang back because it's just something altogether different. The dizzying levels. Can you imagine walking around and everybody looks at you because they know you from somewhere? I cannot fathom that. I think what you just said, Adam, that's Bob's pop diagnosis of 50 years of living in and around this, dynamic in my family and with my friends. And, I found myself, listen, I have expectations for Gregg Allman as an artist, of course, right? He didn't make a lot of solo records, but those are my expectations on another person. So I found myself kind of releasing a little bit of the angst I had toward Gregg watching the film. Sometimes I feel like Gregg left a lot. My friend Steve Marshall, shout out Steve, calls it Gregg left a lot of unfinished gems, unpolished gems. A lot of songs, a lot of pieces of things. There could have been so much more, but that's all he had, right? That's what he had, and he gave it all. That's also something that they say in the documentary. Very clear. Dude went out on his sword. Dude went out on his shield, sword in hand.
Swing it over to Michael, or wherever you want to take it.
So, people who maybe follow my Facebook profile, I've mentioned this here a few times, but not so in depth. It was about 8 years ago where my second marriage ended, and I was like, what the hell's going on? Why is all this going on? And I wound up getting on a path of self-discovery and what's called a hero's journey. And it's called a hero's journey because part of the ingredient is you have to go back into the trauma from your childhood and try to understand how that then impacted your entire life. And so I've done a lot of study in that area. There's a whole thing called trauma therapy, where it really focuses on that early childhood stuff is carried in our bodies the rest of our lives and impacts all of our behavior in one way or another. And so with that lens, as soon as they got into talking about their dad being murdered at that age and mom never got remarried, and that Gregg had 7 wives, Gregg never got to witness a healthy relationship. Plus the trauma of what all happened to him was driving their desire to become famous, become stars, and also they're then running away. People who've had childhood trauma, and I judge in the baby boom generation, it's about 90% of us. you spend a lot of time running away from the pain. And we just, from our DNA, we flee, we fawn, we fight, whatever we do to survive and figure out how we can have a career or whatever it is that will then help try to feed what's this kind of gaping wound that we have. But none of it ever really solves what we never did have as kids. So I came into it with that perspective. And so as soon as they got into the early childhood stuff, and I'll be honest, I read part of Alan's book, but I haven't done a deep dive into the books and the biographies. And I thought the way everything was handled was incredible. I thought there was tremendous transparency throughout the entire movie. And I immediately was identifying with Gregg and Duane's trauma that they had in their early childhood. And that whole thing of never witnessing a loving relationship, which was also true for me. And then, of course, Gregg has 7 wives. And what did they all try to do? And as Cher mentioned in the documentary, I was going to fix them. Well, guess what? Nobody can fix that wound, that whatever that is for anybody. And Gregg finally became, when he saw that footage of him on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and that's when the light bulb went off, and he just stopped. And it's called he didn't really go deep into what was driving him to do that. But he was so shook by it that's when he just stopped. And that's, and then the 2003 piece where I got to work with them. And he was in great shape. He was in fine form. The singing in that era was, really good. And you just watch that concert. It was amazing. So I had produced that DVD extra, which is the documentary. But it wasn't called a documentary that was on this, which has long ago been cut out. And you can find it on Amazon used. So because of all this and the document, I got it ripped off of my DVD and then watched it back for the first time since I did it, literally, in 2003. And I'm going, whoa. I was really taken by it again from a very fresh place of not having lived with it. And we did all that in 2 days. I interviewed every member. Kirk West was right behind me the whole time, and he never said a word to me, which in retrospect means he didn't have to give me any advice. I knew what I was doing, to be blunt. And all those interviews in there, it's amazing stuff. And it's on my Facebook profile. I put it up on YouTube, and then YouTube took it down. And it must have been because of music copyright issues. But they didn't send me a message. All of a sudden, it's just not there. So it is on my Facebook profile. I just reposted it the other day. But it's really just what was going on in 2003. And there's some really silly stuff in there. There's some really sincere, some great stuff. It's really showcases why this band was so important. And back then, that's when Sanctuary was doing this whole thing of they were going to sign up these classic rock bands because Tom Lipsky, the president, wait a minute, you guys can do a new album. Why not? Why not? And the whole idea was to do a new album and to do a greatest hits live DVD. And so that's what I got to do, that part of it. And Hitting the Note was the album. And, it was a great chapter. And Warren talking about they had never really written songs together and how he went down to Gregg's place. And I think Gregg mentions that he came and he just slept for a day or two. And then all of a sudden they started writing together. And I think Warren had said in there that they had never really written that way together before. So all that stuff I found to be really fascinating. That this was, that's because the record label went, no, you guys can do this, go. And so that was a great era, that Sanctuary. It was a British company, and they came in and they had a lot of money, and they spent it all in about 4 years, and they went back out of business. They went out of business. But they did that with a number of bands, and I got to shoot a bunch of them. And it was a great, because the belief was, wait a minute, because a lot of these bands still they're maybe even better than ever in some ways, but they weren't going to have huge hit albums anymore. So the majors just wouldn't touch them.
I'll tell you, that's Michael, that's the really great observation about both the project you worked on and the possibilities that are there for these legacy artists, if you will. And my estimation over the years, first of all, I want to say, for the record, the world needed one more album like Hitting the Note from that lineup of the band. And honestly, they just refused to go back in the studio. Much of that, I think, was Butch. He just did not like it, didn't want to spend the time and effort. And it did cost a lot of money back then to go in the studio and do that. The pickers cost money. It's, even just the band, right? But what a record. And, again, a great, I call them late period records. I was talking with somebody, actually, Charles Davis of the Macon Music Review. Shout out, Charles, Macon Music Review. My boys down there in Macon. About their record opens with Greenwood, Mississippi from Little Richard, a real late period, from the real thing, RILL thing. Little Richard on the cover, all his makeup melting, he's got sweating. It's wonderful, but it's a late period record. They didn't do Lucille or Keep a Knockin', they did this later period thing. If I had not given any listen to the Allman Brothers after Duane died, right, or after they broke up in 75, I would have missed so much in my life, including this conversation would not have happened because I would have just been, I would have lost the interest in the band. But the fact of the matter is, you just said it right, Michael, like every one of these legacy bands, if you listen to any of their later period stuff, particularly in the 90s and 2000s, as the record before the streaming kind of killed them, they have some great tunes, great cover choices. To me, on Hitting the Note, I'll put Desdemona and High Cost of Low Living against just about anything in their catalog. I agree with you, Afro Blue Sky Dog. It's just a really great, like I said, late period record. And you said it, Michael, like your video, I did the same, although I didn't seek your video out. It came to me, but your movie came. I left the thing and I wanted more. I want more Allman Brothers. Like I need more. And I, sat down and I don't know at what point I watched yours and shared it around with my friends. Everybody's like, oh my God, whole bunch you've been to the Beacon. And you captured a time when things were really, the spirits were super high. They had divorced. They'd had the divorce with Dickie. And I'm always calling it that. It was a divorce. He wasn't kicked out of the band, for the record. They said, we're going to tour without you. And their partnership agreement, as I understood, said arbitration. If anybody disagrees with anything, it goes to arbitration. Dickie didn't want them to carry on using the Allman Brothers name without him. He lost an arbitration. Going into it, in Alan's book, he reports, JMO says, there's only two ways you can leave. You can't get fired from the Allman Brothers. You can either quit or die. And after the arbitration, JMO says, well, I guess Dickie quit. So spirits were high. Warren rejoins the band in 2001 at the Beacon. It was a big deal. They go touring or doing really well. When they roll in March of 2003, they either had just recorded Hitting the Note or were just about to. They had songs. And your video, captured a whole lot going on. It captured the spirit of the Beacon Theater, which was a big deal. I did not know why, that it was this packaged piece through Sanctuary, and good on them. I wish more could or would do that. It's just the industry's not like that anymore, And
the whole thing was, when you did a DVD, when you got to produce one with a band, you're supposed to come up with DVD extras. And that's what that in theory was. But I was like, wait, I didn't even think of it as a documentary. But I over-delivered, basically. This was what the reality was.
Great.
I was to work with the Allman Brothers. Are you kidding me? And it's like, so the interviews all went so well. And our crew was out getting all that B-roll. That sequence with Ron Delsner is just hysterical. And I've had people online go, what an asshole, what an asshole. No. Everybody knows he's pulling their leg in the biggest way possible. He's been their promoter forever. You know, they've been making all this money through Ron. And so the whole thing is just so ludicrous. It's just really stupid.
Everyone they seem really comfortable with you. Everyone you interviewed, they just seem really comfortable, at ease, that you spoke to, and that's definitely a compliment to you. Afro Blue Skydog said hitting the note is really close to a masterpiece in the chat for anyone who's listening on audio. I want to go back to this thing about when you guys were talking about trauma, because I mean, when you're a public figure, you're going to be subject to ridicule, to judgment, and all these things. But it does bother me when there's this element of judgmentalism, you know, when people say, oh, you had 7 wives, they look at that as a character flaw, and it's not the ideal, certainly. But I think, you know, a lot of those jokes and jabs from whoever's like makes those kinds of comments, they're not really considering the suffering that this man experiences in his life. And like you guys are talking about, he never experienced or viewed firsthand a healthy relationship. So how could he possibly, you know how to even, you know, be in one? So it's really not his fault, I feel like, to a large degree. Like, between what happened with his dad being murdered and then losing Duane and Barry and all that, it's just a tough life. And even he suffered mentally, physically, but mentally, spiritually, you know, and all that stuff, but also physically. Like, it wasn't so much in the doc as much, but in Alan Paul's book, you know, he talks about in detail about what it's like to get a liver transplant. And I didn't know anything about getting a liver transplant. That is not a fun procedure at all. That is just incredibly painful. They got to remove bones and organs and shift things around. It's a very painful recovery. I don't think you can really eat. You know, it's just an incredible amount of suffering that this man went through in his life. And, you know, music was kind of maybe really, you know, his escape, his focus, and, you know, to get away from pain.
That's where he got to be his authentic self, was by doing music. And that's where he could have a basis where he wasn't in the pain. He wasn't running away from it. He could just be doing the music. And what I call a lot of the judgments that come down is, I see it as people who are stuck in a 70s mentality, when it's the artist's fault. What's wrong? Why were they, you know, and this is the thing with Tommy Bolin. A lot of people have that 70s, they just blame him. You know, the artist gets blamed. They're just people who happen to be so driven to do music, and they had a certain gift that all of a sudden they become well known and renowned. But underneath it all, they're just like you and me. And through all the work I've done, I've just gotten so much more of an empathic sense of just being able to understand why people act out, why people are addicts, all these judgments that can be made. And it's just not. There's a group that has a song where the lyrics are, "It's not fair." I think their name is Tedeschi Trucks Band. And that's kind of what that is. But I just also wanted to say that I think the documentary is a masterwork, you know, because I've made, you know, some of these, you know, I've been in that business and the creative space of how do you do all this. And so when I go to see something like that, I'm like, all my antennas all out. I'm going to have to be, I want to cry. You know, I've admitted this now. I want to cry at a music documentary, but then it's got to have a certain quality to it to be able to get to me to where that'll happen. And I thought this thing was just incredible. And I was definitely really tender. And then all of a sudden, there's my footage from the Beacon, which I had no idea was in there. And that just, you know, and that's not why I thought it was great, but that was just on a personal level. That was really gratifying. But it's a great music documentary, period.
I agree. Great work by you. Great work by James Keach, of course, the director of this documentary, Gregg Allman, The Music of My Soul. I think just watching your project and his project, it just makes me feel that much closer to the music, more connected to the music, and even more connected to everyone on screen speaking, and who's alive or not alive. I just feel that much more connected to these people. I don't know. You feel like you kind of know them, and you feel, you know, empathy too, but also definitely sympathy. Like these people suffered. Greg suffered a lot, and it's just like, you know, you see them suffering, and you want them to do well, like you're saying with your brother Bob and all that. You want the best for these people. And what jumped out at me was Greg talking about, I think it was after Duane's death in the documentary and Music of My Soul, talking about how he was mad at Duane for leaving, mad at God for this allowing this to happen, mad at himself for feeling helpless and having his own personal issues. That really captured this sort of like helplessness and these sort of like, you know, what it's like to be in that space. It's like it's a sad helpless feeling is the word I keep coming back to.
That's exactly what it is. And what, I mean, you know, again, my understanding, we don't need to talk about a big trauma dump here, but I think, you know, Michael picked up on it best. Look, there's a lot of loss in this story, not just Duane and Barry, right? Their dad was murdered. J-Mo's dad died very young. Duane and Barry died young, and so did so many of their contemporaries at the time, right? Like, you know, like Michael said, you guys, the boomer generation was making up this kind of stardom, rock and roll stardom, not pop music stardom, but different as they went along. And, you know, right, Gregg's got all this going on, as does, by the way, to a certain extent, Dickie, to a certain extent, Barry, Butch, and J-Mo. There's, you know, I can't speak to any, like, I know Dickie himself admitted substances, and Butch, I know, quit drinking and did drugs. So, like, I'm not telling tales out of school. Drugs and alcohol, though, are a way early on that people learn to mollify that anxiety, that pain that you're talking about, Adam, whatever it is, right? I'm pissed at myself. I'm pissed at my dad. I'm pissed at my mom. I'm pissed at Duane. I'm pissed at Barry. I'm pissed at Dickie, you know, whatever, like all of these things. And so, you know, I think the point being for me with Gregg as an artist, and where it was exactly what Michael said. Like, I was like, yes, the father's murder story was an important sort of way to begin the story, and saying, look, it doesn't begin with the happy nuclear family. You know, there's something deeply happening there. And, you know, it's like the song These Days, which he didn't write, but he might as well have. He owns it, in my opinion. And even Jackson Browne almost said as much, you know, like he has the definitive version of my song. And what did he say about Gregg that I thought was so perfect? He said, look, that's a major key song. That's not a blues song. That's a major key song. And yet somehow, no matter what, same chords, Gregg sings it as a blues.
Even Jackson, I was going to say, even after, you know, Jackson Browne heard Gregg sing the song, he said that influenced him, and it made him almost like revisit how he did the song, which is sort of an interesting,
you know, like leaving the circle unbroken. That term, will the circle be unbroken? That's legit, right? You're closing the circle. You're leaving the circle unbroken by giving the influence their influence back. It's kind of like Duane playing with Eric Clapton on Layla. I mean, Eric Clapton was the #1 guitarist in the world. Everybody studied him. And then Duane, at 23 years old, gets to sit with him and play for real for a whole double album, giving back to Eric Clapton what he took from Eric in the beginning. I think those are cool full circle moments.
Well, Clapton,
and that was a good one in the movie.
Clapton had heard The Weight, and he had heard Hey Jude by Wilson Pickett. And he went, who the hell is that?
Yeah.
So he was as curious about Duane as Duane was about Eric.
Yeah.
And but the thing I wanted to say, that I thought the way Keach incorporated Jackson Browne in this, which I wasn't, you know, that was like new. That was for me. I see the two of them performing all the stuff he contributed. You know, that was really, I thought, a very powerful part of the documentary. Just that whole.
I agree. I think at first I was like, why Jackson Browne? You know, I know they had this one very brief relationship way back, but they've obviously stayed in touch as famous people do, which is not like, you know, I don't think it's all the time, especially in that era. I thought, I'm just going to say a little criticism. I thought there were much better journalists than Robert Hilburn to speak. And I'm really disappointed, I'm going to say. Cameron Crowe was not the person sitting there. I know Hilburn's a very famous rock writer and's got a really long resume, and maybe that's what you're supposed to do in these settings. But his Allman Brothers work is shallow. I mean, it's his resume is shallow. It's the work isn't shallow, but there's plenty of people who have written, and Cameron Crowe would have been perfect for it. I just found his contributions were just meh to me. While we're talking about contributors, that's one I was like, why, second time around particularly, I'm like, wait, he doesn't say anything that, others couldn't say. But I thought, like you said, Jackson Browne was, yeah.
Should we get to this topic? Suzanne's asking why wasn't Derek in the project? Was he, I did a quick Googling. I think and you guys were saying he was in the credits as well. So they did interview him, but they didn't include any of the Derek. Is that true?
Michael maybe knows something here.
I
asked Alan Paul too, and he said he wasn't sure either.
I have assumptions. And it's from going last night to this Telluride showing. And I talked to the director afterwards. The amount of footage they had, it becomes this unbelievable thing of what do you leave out? And who's the most compelling, and et cetera. So I believe they probably did interview Derek, and he just wound up being on the cutting room floor in terms of his interview. But he's in the thing a lot. With the Allman footage.
Yes,
right, on camera, on screen, performing on stage. I get. They didn't really focus as much on the later, the music itself from late stage Allman Brothers as much, even though there was, and Teal was in the. I'm blending the doc now. I'm blending the documentaries. Now I'm blending
Adam,
Michael's.
I'll take it. Because I'll take this question because I think what Michael says is probably true. And there's plenty of footage out there they could have pulled from. I'm just going to go on the record and say Derek Trucks is a phenomenal interview and a phenomenal quote. If you ask good questions of him and Haynes, both of them. I mean, I run a social media account where I put out primary sources every single day, 2 or 3 a day, whatever. I write thousands of words on the Allman Brothers based on those primary source quotes. And I've barely touched Warren and Derek's quotes that I have in my archives because I'm still doing stuff from the original band. And my point is, they're very thoughtful about who they are associated with and about the institution that they have, and they care about it. And Derek's actually got family ties, right? He understands music as family. I mean, Adam, you've talked about this on your show. That's the thing about TTB. So I found it glaring. I think that, God, could you not because again, I know this stuff pretty well, and I know he's got good shit out there, whether it be your film, Michael, from 23 years ago, or something that he said just recently. So I get it. Things end up on the cutting room floor. I do understand that.
Right. Derek and Warren are excellent interviewers for sure. And I feel like just the fact, just forget the amazing guitar playing and me thinking Derek is, and not just me thinking he's the #1 guitar player in the world in terms of being able to move people emotionally, especially, and the talent and skill and all that too. But the fact that he's just simply related to Butch Trucks, I think that is just worth enough. That's just worth just mentioning in the doc. And also, it was Gregg who said, in so many words, that Derek's basically the reincarnation of Duane. And considering there was a big focus on the loss of Duane in the documentary, you'd think that maybe would be mentioned later on, as part of the recovery for, I can't speak on that. I don't want to put words into Gregg's mouth or put make assumptions like that. But I assume there must have been some amount of catharsis or healing just by being around, just by hearing Derek's guitar and being in a band with him and, being able to not duplicate, emulate, but be playing with someone who's so clearly inspired by someone he loved so much, who was his blood relative. So I feel like just even if Derek wasn't going to be interviewed or his footage didn't appear, I feel like anecdotally, it should have been mentioned. You think that information would have been conveyed? But like you're saying, there's only so much they could.
It's only so much time,
right?
So, when
I would have loved a 3-hour doc. Make it 3 hours. Would have been fine with us. Make it longer.
When I left that movie, I wasn't going, why wasn't Derek in there? I was just blown away by it. And so, listen, I'm tied for second as a huge Derek fan. I don't want to claim number one, but and obviously the piece I did, obviously he's articulate. But Warren was in Allman Brothers a lot longer and through the different chapters. And so, again, when you're getting to the point in the editing room where you got to make these tough decisions, and everything that's been said here about what he could have, should have, or would have contributed, it's all true. And it gets to be just miserably tough when you get to that point. And then you'll come up with certain rationales. And probably one of them was that Warren had been in the band through so many different chapters. And obviously everything he said in there was great. It's not like that was lame. Why didn't they put Derek in there? So
maybe they could add more. Maybe they could put out more just like, I don't know, bonus footage or behind the scene, whatever it is, just add more. Derek lived with, Suzanne says Derek lived with Gregg in California. I wasn't familiar when.
Yeah, like when he was 14, 15, I don't know when he went out there to play in Gregg's band. That's the story when he talks about driving the Corvette and Gregg pulls over and shows him his track marks and says, don't ever mess with heroin. Don't ever mess with this stuff. So like really early, right around the time he was forming Derek Truck's band or right before when he was out there. I'll say to add to Michael, who I keep wanting to call Tommy because I look up and I see Tommy right under your face. So, but I'll add to what Michael said. I didn't leave the movie either and say, where was Derek? It was a few hours later and talking to somebody else, and I realized, where was Derek, kind of thing. And I think, like I say, as I said in the beginning, when you watch any movie about a subject that you know a lot about, you have expectations when you go into it about what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And Michael is 100% correct in saying a film, a book, Play All Night, Duane Allman in the Journey to Fillmore East, a record album, right? Any piece of art, anything you are creating is open to someone else's criticism. And for the most part, that criticism that's not what I would have done. And so then criticism becomes, like we're saying, Michael, it's like something for us to talk about, and you understanding it as a filmmaker, and I understand it actually as a writer too. Here's a funny story about what I didn't want to talk about sex and drugs in my book. The reason why was because Scott Freeman's book called Midnight Riders, and to some extent, Alan's had covered all of that stuff with the Allman Brothers. It just doesn't do a lot for me, except as drugs impact the music, or even sex does, meaning good songs, relationships, blah, blah, blah. In doing so, I'm about to turn the book in, and I realize that I have not written about their drug bust in Jackson, Alabama, right after recording Fillmore East, nor, as I think about it more, when Twigs Linden killed Ray Aliotta in Buffalo in April 1970. Two details that are important to the Allman Brothers story, but because of my block and how I approached it, I don't want to do sex and drugs. I left it out of my almost final narrative. Had somebody called me out on that in reviewing the book, I would have said, yeah, huge glaring error, So like I'm with Michael. I agree that Keach and other people, the choices you make are the choices you make. And it's really easy for me to sit here a month later and criticize those. And like Michael said, I am all in all extremely happy. And I'm really glad Gregg gets to go out on this high note because it was looking like he wasn't going to 20 years ago, which was the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which gave him that moment of clarity, as they call it in those circles, to get off that roller coaster, get off that merry-go-round, actually.
30 years.
I was gonna say, I think a big revelation that Gregg, I don't know when he had the revelation in his life, probably later and sometime in the 21st century, when he mentioned in the documentary, he suffered so long and continued to suffer, just thinking about the loss of his brother. But I forget how he phrased it, but he's like Duane didn't. He felt he got cheated by Duane leaving, and Duane's life got cheated. But then he said at some point, Duane had a blast when he was here. He had a great time. So I think that is a healthy you know, and kind of like the only way or the best way to like have perspective on such a tragic event, like for him to actually come around to that conclusion after years and years of suffering. I think that was a moment where that really jumped out at me. Like, you know, that quote there saying, just realizing, you know, even though Duane had a very short life, he had a great time on this planet.
He was the leader. This point got made big time. And that's why everybody was so shocked and crushed when he passed, because he was the boss. It was his idea, and it all worked so magically. And I just wanted to say that, you know, it's called Gregg Allman, Music of My Soul. It is one great Allman Brothers documentary, just as a thing. And so I came out, I was always into the band. I got to work with them. And I came out of it more of a fan of Allman Brothers. It deep. I think you mentioned something about that earlier, Adam. Just
feel more connected.
Yeah, I felt way more connected. And I wasn't judging it. I was like loving it, loving them, loving what it was. And Barry, when he died, you know, they talked about how he never got over it. And that was the leadership piece that Duane was manifesting.
Yeah, I remember. I was
just going to say, Joel Selvin wrote a great book about the Grateful Dead after Jerry died. It is in depth, like as in depth as you could ever comprehend. And they were like feral cats. Jerry was it, just like Duane really was for Allman Brothers. And that was, I'll remember the name in a second. But anyway, it's all about what happened to each one of them and all the projects they did and everything, and all the infighting and everything they did, which finally came to its conclusion when they did the reunion of Trey and the band. But that it just shows that when somebody's the leader. But see, I think the secret weapon with the Allman Brothers was that Dickie was actually such a great writer. And so when he did Ramblin' Man after Duane had passed, that became their hit single. And that's what really propelled them. And and then I go back to Idlewild South, and the first song on the album is Revival, which is Dickie's. And that should have been a hit single, but that was before the band had become powerful enough to then have a hit single. And that song is just phenomenal. And that's the second album. And the first song on the album was from Dickie. So he obviously also was an incredibly gifted, talented musician. And that's where all the controversy comes around, you know, because Gregg basically he had finally gotten clean. I think that was the core of the whole issue. Because, you know, Dickie wasn't he wasn't clean and sober. He wasn't living that lifestyle. And I think that's what Gregg couldn't handle, had that being around, because he had taken him so long, 15 rehabs. And I think that was the line in the sand for him. He just couldn't have anybody there in a dressing room or whatever, drinking, doing whatever they would be doing. He just needed to be a clean and sober environment. And I think with the 15 rehabs, he showed that, wow, he finally got there. And I think that was the root of why they did what they did. And I think at the end of the day, Dickie was not into recovery as such. You know, I can't speak.
And I'll say too, this is a well-known in the Allman world in that era before Dickie left. If Gregg was wasted or Gregg was not at his best, you could turn the organ down. You could not play as many of his songs, play his songs earlier in the set or later, whatever. If Dickie was on a bender of any sort, he was very, very loud, could impact everything with the band, right? Because he was the leader on stage.
He liked being loud. His guitar.
He did, as do most of us, you know, but he was obnoxiously so when he would tie one on, particularly as it got more. And so there was, I mean, when they said, listen to the tapes, that was one thing Dickie was always mad. Gregg said, I mean, I did listen to those tapes. I was at the last Beacon run with Dickie and something was missing. And whether it was Gregg was, I think also, Michael, Gregg being sober meant he was listening to more what Butch was saying in terms of the band's direction and what was happening. Dickie and Butch had a falling out. And J-Mo, at least according to everything I know, just kind of really most of the time went with the majority unless he felt really strongly about something, one or other. But I want to say again, I know Dickie said it was kicked out of the band, etc. They suspended him. They couldn't kick him out of the band. That's not how their agreement worked when they reformed. So he took them to arbitration and lost. And in doing so, they were allowed to keep the name, carry on. I think he got a pretty good financial settlement and a financial settlement of them using the name going forward. He had earned that name. And, you could keep them apart to a certain extent until you couldn't. And it did impact the music. And had Haynes not come back in 2001, I mean, the summer 2000 is with Derek and Jimmy Herring remains some of the greatest music I have ever heard with my own ear, only hearing one. But that summer I caught 2 shows and then I got a whole bunch of tapes just about everything. Because the way that Jimmy and Derek spoke together with O'Teal was going back to 69, 70, even before Fillmore East. It was way wild. And then when Jimmy declined to join and Haynes came back, they had to create a new sound because there used to be 2 very distinct parts, the Dickie part and the Duane part, or it was Dickie Warren, Dickie Derek, whatever else. And now they had to bring it together. And I mean, that went for 13 really, they went out on top. They could have kept touring and they could have done another album. They chose not to. And then, Gregg got cancer and died. Butch died by suicide. And that was the end of the Allman Brothers, 2017. I think Butch was first in January, and then Gregg. And so I really don't know where I was going with this whole thing, but I feel like I made a really good point, and I'll just stop with that one.
I just like to listen to you guys and tell the stories and hear all your insights and thoughts on the band. It was interesting to hear Gregg talk about when Duane was telling him, "Oh, I found this new lead guitar player," and Gregg is like, "What? You found a lead guitar player? Aren't you a lead guitar player?" And what I thought Gregg was going to say about Duane was that I'm going to focus on leading the band. I'm going to be the band leader. That's going to be my role. But he's referring to slide guitar, which is still, I feel like, a form of lead guitar. But I guess I didn't even realize or think about how revolutionary and how original their sound was in terms of those harmony guitars.
Yes.
There's bands obviously before and around the same time that had 2 guitar players, but the dueling harmonies was probably a different,
very unique to them. Very unique to them. I mean, yes, other bands doing it, country bands doing it. Certainly Buck Owens and Don Rich and Buck Owens and Buckaroos. That sounds a lot like it. Dickie talks about the twin guitars of Western swing, Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys, etc. Like that was not common in rock. 2 lead guitars. You had a rhythm guitarist and you had a lead guitarist usually. So yeah, real groundbreaking stuff. And then of course 2 drummers, which that got addressed really beautifully too in the movie. That's a famous quote from Duane. J-Mo has never told a different story than I wanted it because Otis Redding had 2 drummers. J-Mo's never changed that story from first time I found a J-Mo quote in the 70s all the way through that movie. I always say it was a foregone conclusion Gregg was going to. Duane goes to Jacksonville to pull players together. He has his contract in hand with Phil Walden / Jerry Wexler of Atlantic Records. He's been trying to get Barry Oakley to join his band. This idea, because he and Barry really share a vision for music. Barry has a partner in Dickie Betts who he really doesn't want to abandon. And so Dickie begins playing with Barry and Duane among the players in Jacksonville, and they're developing something. And then Duane comes back eventually with J-Mo. Actually, Barry goes to Muscle Shoals to record in January of 69 with Duane. And that's where J-Mo says, Dickie once asked him, what did it sound like when you Barry and Duane were playing in Muscle Shoals? And J-Mo says, the only thing I can describe it is what happened to me the first time I heard Mahavishnu Orchestra, which is a couple of years later, and mind-blowing jazz fusion. That's what those guys were doing. So eventually Barry goes back home. He's got a baby and a band back in Jacksonville. Duane and J-Mo show up in early March of 69. And then J-Mo and Butch start playing together and they fit. And then Duane puts them all in a room together, March 23rd, 69. Anybody in here not gonna play in my band's gonna have to fight your way out, he says at the end of the jam. And that's when he called Gregg, Adam. So I'm setting up the Gregg story. I got this band, it's really cooking.
But Reese Winans was in Butch and Dickie's band. And so,
I have a story about that actually. Can I break a story real quick? So I talked this week to Richard Price of The Load, who was in around Jacksonville and was in the second version of The Second Coming with Reese. And we talked a little bit about Reese, and he said, I asked Reese about that. And this will come on a podcast of mine in a couple weeks. He said, I asked Reese. He said, Duane pulled him aside. And he said, man, I'm really sorry. We really like your playing. But we're going to, we don't need 2 keyboard players, 2 guitarists, 2 drummers. And Gregg is our singer. We really want his vocals. And, Reese, I hope I'll get a chance to talk to him. He sat in with TTB last October here in Nashville. I was at that show. Well, we should have met then, Michael. Yeah, I was there too.
Reese was looking like he was having the best time he's ever had.
Yeah. Doesn't everyone when they're playing with TTB?
Yes.
And Reese though was just the joy. It was like a volcano. And I was just projecting that, hey, you guys want to invite me to join your band? Well, no, but I mean he's done great.
Yes, I mean, and that's kind of that is a little bit of what Richard said. We know Reese, he landed with Boz Scaggs, ends up with Bonamassa for a number of years, has a really good solo album. If you guys want to check it out, Jack Pearson, the great Jack Pearson, plays guitar on a track on it. He may play on more than one, but I know it's one. But yeah, Reese was there as the Second Coming's keyboard player. And I thought, it sounds like Duane handled it pretty well, it's just a 22-year-old guy with a contract in pocket and ready to go and has some sort of.
It's his brother.
Yeah.
One of the things that I appreciated about this documentary and appreciate about you guys, and something I talk about with TTB all the time, is how I'm constantly being educated about music and artists and bands that I'm just not as familiar with, and I can plead ignorance a little bit and blame some of it on youth, but even just mentioning some of the names and early influences that Gregg was mentioning in the doc, the Floyd Miles and the Hank Ballard. I wrote down some notes here, Little Anthony and the Imperials. These are acts that I'm not really familiar with, but I'll tell you one thing, if Gregg's super duper inspired by them and knowing that TTB is super inspired by the Allman Brothers, I'm definitely going to be diving into all this new music. So I'm constantly discovering new music through TTB and through the Allman Brothers, who are not even a thing anymore, who Gregg's not even on this planet. And I'm still being influenced by them. And just by listening to these other artists that meant so much to Gregg and the Allman Brothers and to Derek and Susan and TTB, I feel that much closer to them and to the music and to this whole world. So I definitely appreciate that. I'm constantly discovering new music and being educated. That's definitely something meaningful to me. And that's what sustains me for a big part of what sustains me continuing to be able to do this podcast, because you're not just getting to know TTB and their original songs, which are amazing. Of course, I love all of them, but you're getting a music education that's constantly, school is always in session.
And how this year they brought out Everyday People. I mean, Sly songs for years. But what band is better positioned to try to do Sly and the Family Stone music than TTB? And then because of the whole political climate, I believe that's why they chose to add Everyday People into the repertoire this year. And that brings up Sun, Sand, and Soul, because there's that new documentary on Earth, Wind, and Fire on HBO that Questlove put together. And, of course, Philip Bailey and their original sax player came from Denver. And when I was, here. And so that's a great documentary. That just premiered about a month ago on HBO Max. And, they've continued on since Maurice died years back. And so they're headlining the second night at Sun, Sand, and Soul, which obviously very intentional. I got to think Derek and Susan wanted Earth, Wind, and Fire to be there. And so, because I'd be shocked if they didn't. Have they ever played any of their songs? I don't know if they have, but
Not that I know of.
I've seen fans request. That's always a thread once in a while. List people just, everyone's a music producer when it comes to TTB because they're so versatile and so talented and have 12 members playing all these different instruments that they can do Stevie Wonder and Earth, Wind and Fire and Mad Dogs and Allman Brothers and
Prince.
And not only can they do it, they're the most qualified, and not only the most qualified, they make it their own, and of course too at the same time, of course they do covers of covers, whether it's Ohio or some of these other songs as well. So the soul versions.
When I started listening again to Idlewild South here recently, and Revival again stood out to me. Such an upbeat, positive, great song. And I just was wondering, I don't think, has TTB ever done that?
No.
That's a natural. Hey, Derek, Susan, you out there?
Yeah. Actually, Michael, that is a wonderful, suggestion for that band to record or to do that particular song. If we could segue to a little more TTB love, can I just go ahead and throw some out there too? Because, they come from the same tree, right? Like without Gregg and Duane, and Derek has gone on the record to say this. In fact, just this week I posted video of the unveiling of the historical marker in Jacksonville. And that was something he said to the newspaper at the time. I remember the article ended up on the web, right? Like it all kind of begins here for me, And one of the things that the OG Allman Brothers were and continued to be were the carriers of the canon, not just their own, but the great blues songs. And sometimes they would do jazz, but for the most part, it was the blues stuff that they were keeping. And TTB is much the same way. Government Mule is the same. Those bands from this family tree, this is how they roll. And like you just said, Michael, you brought up earlier, It Ain't Fair. When they first played that a couple years ago at the Beacon, I was like moved beyond belief because it's not an obscure Aretha song necessarily, but I don't think it's on many of her, if any of her greatest hits. It's an album cut that was on the Duane anthology. I heard later, actually from the producer of the second Duane anthology, that they couldn't get either a Lulu. I think it was a Lulu song that they didn't want to give the rights to. So Walden said, well, go grab It Ain't Fair from Aretha, which was just ideal. They do that song very close to the original, which is fine, right? Not just the vocals, the guitar, and then you got Kebby channeling King Curtis.
Alicia.
I was going to say that's where I was going. The balls
burns the hole in the thing.
So I have been known to stand at several different venues and weep as she sings that song, and it's an uncontrollable emotion.
It's show stopping.
I can't.
Don't try to control it, Bob.
Yeah, it is.
And
it's like
otherworldly. It's like
I literally have a handkerchief in my hand and I'm wiping my eyes because I just can't. It is so emotive and so beautiful. And then Derek decides to roll it into the other song that brings me to my knees every single time the Allman Brothers played it and every single time he touches it, which is Dreams. And Dreams, again, going back to Gregg, that guy was 20 years old when he wrote some of the deepest, most existential lyrics I've ever come across. That feeling of climb down off the hilltop and getting back in the race at the end. Michael, that's what you're talking about with the therapy, right? And all the work you did. It's what Gregg talked about. It's this beautiful bookend to Despair. Went up on the mountain and the whole world is falling down. And then this beautiful solo that Duane plays, Derek plays, Warren plays, Dickie and Warren used to play, blah, 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 that fills the gap that reminds the listener, reminds the singer, the band, pull myself together, put on a new face, climb down off the hilltop. Like that's what that, so you get It Ain't Fair. God damn, it sucks. And Alicia just ringing it all out. And then you go, and then you're like, it's like not even a respite for the band or for us. We are going to keep the emotion at the top. And I respect the shit out of that band for that type of execution constantly. I think it's easy to miss how damn good they are.
No,
The jump stops that they do at the end of songs.
I disagree, Bob.
You think it's easy? Do you think it's easy to? I think people take for granted how hard what they do. How some of the simple stuff, so what seems simple, is really difficult to get 12 people to do how they're doing it. They're so
one
good.
voice as one voice. And it's the choices they make. You know, every song they do is because they said we're going to do this, and the whole thing, every 2-hour show is like its own perfect performance. Is how I see them. And
I was getting emotional just hearing you talk about dreams and just thinking about it and hearing that organ in my head. Something about that is just
I have to share
takes you
this.
somewhere else.
First year I went and saw them, and I've said before I've been late to the party. It was 2023 at Red Rocks, and I think I was in row 35. And when you're up that high, you can see out over the top. You can see the lights of Denver, but you can also, it's the Eastern Plains going way out. And they're doing dreams, and there's this thunderstorm like 150 miles out, way east of Denver. The lightning, the whole thing. That was what makes Red Rocks, that kind of moment, the synchronicity of that night. And they're doing dreams, and that's often on the horizon. It's just absolutely incredible.
There's nowhere like that in the world, from what I gather. I don't think there is. Not that I can. No one's ever mentioned anything that this. No one's ever said this to me. This is like Red Rocks. There's no one. That's a phrase that I've never heard, and I've talked about hundreds of venues.
I've never been to the Gorge, but I understand the Gorge is probably somewhat similar in vibe.
It's not the city,
right?
And then the plains with the thunderstorms. Because up to the I don't think there's a lot of thunderstorms. Eastern Colorado can have a lot.
You had that. I mean, that I have also, Michael, sat there and watched the horizon, the city at the to the east. And quick note, so when I saw the Allman Brothers there, I am not lying to you, it was a full moon, and we watched the moon just gradually come up until it broke, and then as soon as it broke the horizon, everybody went woo, because like Michael's saying, like if you're up high enough. And it's not that high. You can see above the stage. You can see until the world rounds. You're seeing all the way to the end of the world that your eyes can possibly
Kansas,
see.
all the way to Kansas.
And you saw a freaking massive, beautiful thunderstorm in a distance. And I saw the full moon. As you were telling the story, I went right back there and I pictured that moon.
Was that 2004? Do you know what year that was, Bob?
I was there in 95.
Because I think it was the year after I did the 2003, I believe they played Red Rocks, and I was at that show, and I just remember the version of Whipping Post they did that night. That was just like, got to be kidding me.
Anyway, thank you for giving me some chance to talk a little bit about TTB and song choices. I'm fixing presenting at a conference this fall on the Beatles. Revolver is 60 years old, and I was like, okay, how can I tie the Allman story to this? And so the name of the panel is "She Said, quote, Tomorrow Never Knows," which is what Government Mule mashed those two songs up back in the 90s. And then the arc of the story is, while Duane and Gregg were influenced by the Beatles, they never covered the Beatles, but who has? And then I talk about TTB and the Mule, but mainly TTB because of what they do with the how the catalog got reimagined with Mad Dogs and Englishmen and Joe Cocker, and how they keep those versions alive. And then also, I always felt the Mule, when they did She Said into Tomorrow Never Knows, it was because Revolver's like one of those records that was just burned into my soul. My mom had it, everything from 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and then they start Taxman all the way to the end. And so to put those two songs together into this massive rock jam instead of a Beatles song, right? It was a rock jam. And so I'm super excited about that because I think one is I am an evangelist, as Adam knows, for TTB and what they do. I think they are a phenomenal band.
I think we all are.
Deserves the attention, and to get a chance to kind of speak in that space to talk about their uniqueness. I think I spend a lot of time talking about cover songs in my book about the Allman Brothers before they formed. And Michael mentions Dickie's writing ability and somewhat arranging ability. Before they formed, Duane and Gregg were kind of stuck in a pattern of playing songs like they sounded like on the radio, or they pulled from records.
Hourglass.
And then getting with Dickie and Barry, who what they said is we took it sideways. We took Trouble No More or Hoochie Coochie Man, Tom Michael's mentioned in Idlewild, just completely flip it on its head. So how artists make songs their own is a really fascinating thing to me. So it's just something I think a lot about. And the Beatles catalog, right, is one of the greatest for being able to reinterpret. And I think our band does a brilliant job of it.
So that was that Hoochie Coochie Man, that recording by the Allman Brothers. No one had ever done a version like that ever, like a hard, like almost like hard rock in a lot of ways. Like that's I mean,
wild. Adam, I should say, for example, Eric Clapton, what he did with Crossroads, the song we all know,
that sort of thing,
that's inspired there, but it's cleaner, right? Crossroads is a lot cleaner. Some of what Johnny Winter was doing also in this era has a similarity to that. But there's a fierceness to the way the Allman Brothers do that blues, and fierce, I see Afro.
Fierce is a good word. Intensity. Yes. There's intensity to it.
Yeah, yep. And Afro Blue Skydog mentioned it right. Hey Jude, thank you for bringing that up, because that's actually that was my my beginning argument for joining this panel was, hey, it started with Duane's career of this wicked cover of Hey Jude that, Michael mentioned earlier, Clapton's favorite solo, he's always said, etc.
And the thing I found fascinating was, which I was maybe a little late to knowing this fact, that Duane had just started playing slide at the point he was there in Muscle Shoals. It wasn't something he had been doing for any number of years.
That's crazy to me. How do you learn that so fast? Even like Gregg learning that. When did Gregg actually? You guys, maybe you know this, Bob or Michael. Like, when did Gregg actually learn the Hammond organ? Because it wasn't really mentioned in his early life. And then he's like, oh, one day I just saw an organ. I'm just gonna. These guys are talented. Like, so they work hard. They develop their talents. Derek can be in this vein too. But like, they work hard there and they dedicate their time, but they also pick things up really, really fast and do have innate talent too.
And it is their full-time job, right? Like by the time, so the Hammond story is pretty famous. Gregg gets to Jacksonville. He immediately goes into the rehearsal, is blown away by what they're doing with Trouble No More. Also a real ramped up version over Muddy's version. Duane coaxes him into singing with a little bit of Big Brother, like, hey, man, because Gregg was like, I don't know if I can cut this. I think he says this in the movie, right? And Duane's like, you little shit, all you punk, all these people waiting, all these nice people. So Gregg's like, give me this. Remember, count the son of a bitch off, I think is what he says. Give me them lyrics. So apparently during this time period, he's in the band, he made it. At one point, they sent him into a room. They had bought him a brand new Hammond. They put a couple joints on the top of the thing and said, okay, we're going to go. You need to sit here and learn how to do this. And Gregg had always been fascinated by them, and so kind of took to it naturally. But part of that conversation, Gregg's told that story a lot of ways, how Duane called him and said this or that. The quotes I use in my book are different than 40 other times he told the story, but it all means the same thing, right? One of the things they said is, as he says, well, I got another lead guitar player. What are you doing? Why do you have two lead guitar players? So don't worry about it. I got two drummers. Why do you need two drummers? Don't worry about it. Oh, by the way, you have to play Hammond organ. And Gregg's like, I'd sat behind him like 2 times.
I wonder if Reese was playing Hammond at that point.
Yes.
So then that might have been part of the vibe also.
I think, like they were all traveling around, right, with those little, Fender Rhodes and the Vox keyboards and the Farfisa and all those things, So I think having the B3 was like the mark of the band, right? And, BB had a B3, a lot of the blues guys did. So I think it was always kind of foreordained. Now, you mentioned slide, and I'll just fill in the gaps there. Duane learned slide from Taj Mahal's record, the first Taj Mahal record with Jesse Ed Davis playing Statesboro Blues is the one. He's playing in standard tuning for the first probably 2 years that he's a slide player, because he doesn't learn how the open E tuning until November 1970 when he goes to Muscle Shoals and meets John Hammond Jr., John Paul Hammond, and they work on that record Southern Fried. So Duane is playing, and that's why Mountain Jam and Dreams are in standard tuning. And then I'm sorry, it's November of 69. I was incorrect. He records with Hammond in November of 69. So that's why the slide songs on Idlewild and everything going forward is in open E. But on the debut album, including Trouble No More, is in standard tuning because Duane hadn't learned the other. And you're right. I mean, by the time he's recording Slide and Muscle Shoals, he's been playing, my God, less than 6 months, because he puts a slide on
That's insane.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be a matter of months. I'd have to look and see when the Taj Mahal record came out, but September of 68 is when he records on the Road of Love with Clarence Carter. He records a slide solo. So, I mean, you're talking a matter of months. And his first thing in Muscle Shoals is to play this slide solo with, so we'll see when that first record came out. Taj Mahal, but it was 68. I know. I just don't know what month.
That's such a challenge. That slide
well,
guitar.
Go on. The great players have an ear. It's already wired right into their musical acumen, and so that's all. That's what Derek has. Tommy Bolin had that way back in the day.
Yes,
and obviously that's what Duane had. He just had the ear, so that's why he could just do it in a sense. It's
their
like
their ear leads their physical body in some regard.
The brain, it all connects up, and they can just do it.
There's such a fine line with slide between screeching cat and human voice singing. Really is.
Adam, it's funny you say that too. I agree with you, and that's why it took me years to pick it up, to even try to play slide on guitar, because it just sounded so terrible, And then, I'm obviously not Duane Allman, right? Like, I'm obviously not of that talent level. When I'm with friends and they're breaking down the things and showing me licks and stuff like that, like the degrees to which Duane is moving his slide is really, like you say, Adam, infinitesimal. And it's like, to get it right. And then, for like Derek and Duane before him right on stage to get it right, imagine the volume and the control and the peace you have to have with yourself to just see like
get that tone, the tones, get those tones.
Yeah,
microtones.
Yeah, and I mean, when that was where Derek made his, when he first came out, nobody was playing slide guitar anymore. I mean, Haynes was, but it was a very limited palette of people. And here was a kid when he was younger who mostly played it until he started. The Allman Brothers, I think, is what made him break out of it into his, the more.
It was because he was a kid with small hands, and also was starting to find those Elmore James influences, I guess.
And like like Michael said, it's in his DNA, it's in his soul. Adam, how many times have I told you this? I don't know how many times we've talked on this show or offline. It was there the first time I saw him at 13 years old. Like it was just like. Here I am in my 20s going, I can't even think of being that like good at anything. And here is his kid at 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, who has grown, by the way, into not just a great musician, but a man, and a fine man who, is pretty remarkable.
Right. It's interesting to hear you talk about how at the time Derek was a kid, blues music and slide guitar, specifically slide guitar, I guess really wasn't such a popular instrument. I think now it's starting to, you see a little bit more slide guitar players. I follow all the Derek inspired guitar players on Instagram, and a lot of them are very, very talented for sure. But Derek has mentioned this in various interviews, talking about how at the time, Stevie Ray Vaughan and that sort of Texas blues and speed and was sort of a big thing. So he was kind of going against the grain, I guess, in a lot of ways by revive. I mean, I don't think it's out of bounds to say he kind of revived slide guitar in some regard, even as like a teenager, maybe. I don't know who else was playing a lot of slide guitar even in the 90s. I mean, Warren played a little slide guitar too, of course, but I mean, I don't know who else
there were not a lot of guys who were. I remember Leroy Parnell in country music got some attention because he'd been playing some slide too. But no, it really was not a thing. And all the guys, all the pickers, not just the guys, all the people who grew up with Derek in either the Allman Brothers or DTB before that through the Allman Brothers, almost all the guitarists play slide in some way. I think it just is the it's what you do, right? It's part of the toolkit. And Derek, without a doubt, is a huge. Even if people aren't playing his licks, they're still inspired by the attempt, because he's the guy who would put slide into Liz Reed, into Whipping Post, like places that Duane and Warren never put slide into.
Johnny Winter always played it. What's up, David Flam? Yeah. That's true. Johnny Winter never stopped playing slide throughout the early.
Yes, but even at that time, Johnny Winter was not all that popular. Like that slide guitar. And Bonnie Raitt always played slide guitar. Remember, Lowell George dies in late 70s, early 80s. He was a slide guy, but for the most part, Derek. I'm gonna say it. Somebody could prove me wrong one day, but Derek Trucks put slide back on the map. Maybe I'll write a column about it one day.
So it seems like that's the case in the 90s. It doesn't seem like, other than the Johnny Winters and the Bonnie Raitt who always played slide, but it didn't seem like there was anyone emerging, as a predominantly or well-known slide guitar player in that era.
Yeah.
So earlier, Adam, I think, and maybe Bob, you mentioned the idea that in Allman Brothers, there would be somebody's playing lead, somebody's playing slide. And I just posted the first song from the Beacon yesterday, 2003. And it struck me that both Derek and Warren are playing incredible slide in that particular version.
Remember how I said earlier, when they came back together, they had to figure that, because that Dreams was another one. It used to be, back in the day, it was Duane played a fretted solo, then he played the slide solo, then they played the outro. When they brought it back after the 89 reunion, Dickie played a beautiful melodic fretted solo, and then they would exchange, and then Warren would play it. So yeah, there always used to be like this push-pull, and it wasn't always like slide and the other, but there were two distinct guitar roles and the places where the solos fit, the part you played, etc. And what Derek and Warren did, they had to reimagine it somewhat, because what their skill set was, what they wanted to do. There's a great one, Michael, one of my favorite parts of the Your film, when they're talking about Statesboro and someone says, well, we're not going to do it, tomorrow. Well, unless someone else wants to record it. And Derek's like, well, I'd like a crack at it. Like, this young kid, he's like, I want to record that one for posterity. And Warren was great. He goes, if we're only doing it once, then you're taking the solo. But if we're going to do it twice, we can do it twice, and I'll do one too. I always thought that was a good little moment on the about how a song, I thought that you captured a good like intimate moment there.
That fly on the wall stuff and that thing is just, and I wasn't necessarily there for all of it. My crew was there as well. And so that's like that inside baseball stuff, having those guys talking about that stuff. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's not normally ever, presented out.
I love those stories, and I think this was in your doc, Michael, when it was what was it, Butch, and I think I forget who else was. Butch was trying to get Warren and Gregg. Butch was trying to get Warren and Gregg to go see 11-year-old Derek, like to hear like adult musicians trying to convince other musicians to go check out the an 11-year-old, 12-year-old kid. Those stories just never get old. I love those, to hear I have no expectation. What's this kid gonna do? And then by the end of the night, Gregg is on stage playing with Derek and all this stuff. And that I was gonna make this a point earlier, how much the music is always at the forefront, and how much they love just playing, and Gregg just loved being on stage and all that. Like, he didn't care that it was a tiny bar and an uncomfortable spot. And he talked about playing a what was it, like a tiny Casio consumer keyboard or whatever. But he's like, yeah, I want to play with Derek. Like, they're so inspired to just, play music that, doesn't matter the crowd, where, when, anytime. Like, they're musicians. And that spirit really does carry on even through TTB. And that, I mean, to not to veer too much into off the topic, But you know, Kebby Williams and TTB always wants to play. He'll play anywhere, anytime, like on flatbed trucks, driving down the street, parades with kids, small venues, after parties. Like, they just love playing, and that definitely shines through with TTB, certainly. David Slam loves your doc. Great film, Michael. So many gold nuggets.
And I also mentioned David as well, because he's the one who's mentioned a number of times. He's aware of every time Kebby's playing somewhere, you know, down in Atlanta, whatever it is, David will be dialed into that. He's mentioned the various situations where Kebby's, you know, like you were just saying, play anytime, anywhere.
Yeah, and I talked about how TTB and the Allman Brothers, they educate me on other music, but like just within TTB, and I've talked about this a billion times, how you're getting new music in your life through the artists within TTB, whether it's Gabe, Kebby, everyone. Everyone has pretty much done other projects and side projects and solo projects and does other shows when they can. It's like I get so annoyed. Not so annoyed, that's probably too strong. But like, you do see these comments on social media saying, oh, rock music is dead, or there's no good music, or old music is so much better. And I get where they're coming from, but I mean, we have the internet, and there's so many young artists being inspired by, they're even just on Instagram, I'm scrolling through my feed or whatever, and I see some like 9-year-old kid playing, you know, Beatles music, Rolling Stones music from the 60s and 70s with incredible amounts of talent. So there's a lot of talented people out there who are playing music beyond just like top 40 pop, you know, for sure.
It's just, you know, I do get annoyed as shit when people do that crap, because, you know, I think the fundamental thing about it is, it's like old people yelling at clouds, right? You know, they say, "Oh man yells at clouds," right? You know why today's music you don't like it? Boomers, Gen Xers, or even millennials. You know why? Because it's not made for you. There you go. Afro Blue Sky Dog says it best. It's because today's music isn't made for you. When you were a kid, everything was made for you. I always say it's on the top of my page on my Facebook page. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug, because it makes you sit and say the past was better. The past was better because you were younger, because you weren't thinking about the same things you're thinking about today, etc. I'm a historian. I spend a lot of time in the past. You know, saying all monoculture stopped when the Beatles broke up, right? Or when Duane died, or any of this stuff, all great art stopped because you got old, is just crap. It's a really bad way to live. And I spend my time in the space of social media. I used to argue about it. I don't do it anymore. I just delete the comments because it bothers. It's just so stupid. Oh, that was when music was good. Well, I'm really sorry, but I just went to a Tedeschi Trucks Band concert a couple months ago, and I'm just telling you, that music was every bit as good as what you heard back then, if not better.
People don't know what they don't know.
I just went to a show last night at the Underdog in Nashville with some cats from the Roots Rock Revival, and I'm telling you, music is alive. It's never going away. It's why we can worry about art, and we can worry about all the shit going on in the world. We can worry about AI. People are still going to create art, and they're still going to make the world better as a result of it, because they're compelled. Going all the way back, they're compelled to. That's Gregg Allman too. I'm compelled to play music. That's it.
Even if
the rest is hard.
Even if things become niche interests, they're always going to be existing. David Flam says, October 28, 2014, the most emotional show I've ever attended. Was that one of the last final Allman Brothers shows? That was the last show.
That was the last show. Yeah, I imagine.
I have a perspective about the people who, like with TTB, who are not into it. The empathic view is to feel sorry that they're missing out. It's still there. Whatever everybody was so inspired by back in the day, it's alive and well. It's still there.
Yeah.
It's music. That's music. Transcends. But it's transportation back to another era, back to another time. It never gets old. Dream still pops for me. I listen to Elizabeth Reed like almost every day. It's a 15-20 minute song, and I listen to it every day, and I'm not sick of it. And it's I'm amazed. Like I can't believe it myself how inspired I am by this music. I do got to wrap things up in a couple of minutes, guys. I appreciate it. If anyone else has any other things you guys like to mention or talk about, I want to definitely give you guys a chance to.
I would just say
your piece, so to speak.
Seeing that movie in the theaters was really the Gregg Allman, The Music of My Soul, was really potent, and it is great. It's a great music documentary, and like I said before, it's Gregg is the thread that goes all the way through, but it is one great Allman Brothers documentary for sure. And so if anybody hasn't seen it or whatever it is. And I guess now you got to rent it. It's not quite the same as going to a theater. I was really hoping it was going to get a theatrical run, but it's tough in this day and age to do that. But it's out there. It's ready. If you got the big home theater set up, whatever it is, this is I'm flat out recommending it for everybody to. If you care about this music, you will care more about it after you.
Watch your doc first, and then the Gregg doc. That's what I did. I wanted to keep my chronology in somewhat of a, so that's what I did at least. Anything else you want to?
No, I think I've said it all. I appreciate everybody being here and dropping the comments. I'm talking about this stuff all the time at longlivetheabb.com. And I got a podcast also that Adam's been on. He was one of my very earliest guests. Hopefully Michael and I will talk a little bit more about his doc one of these days. But I'm just grateful. It's fun. It's always fun to talk about it. And again, all my critiques are very specific to, little quibbles. Overall, I'm with Michael. I think it was a really good great look at an artist that I care a lot about, that who's meant a lot to me, and I think he comes through. The man was a really, really wonderful artist, deep, complex person who'd been through a lot, and his work birthed a movement, a movement in music. And we can say Southern rock, and people bitch about that. It's another one everybody bitches about, but it was indeed Southern rock. The idea that Southerners could make music, live in the South, play the music that sounds decidedly Southern, no polish, that was theirs. They invented that. And out of that comes, and Derek will say it, Tedeschi Trucks Band, 100%.
Good stuff, guys. Thank you so much. Michael, did you have anything else you want to promote? I have a link to your documentary in the comments, and the description, rather, if anyone wants to check that out too.
Yeah, I've gone to 7 more TTB shows this year, and all but one of them I'm in either the first or second row, and I will have my iPhone out. And
for me.
So I'll be posting lots of fresh, up close and personal footage here as the year goes on.
Good stuff.
I'll see you guys at Bethel Woods. I'll see you at Bethel Woods August 31st. I got a gig at Woodstock, so I will be speaking on the book and then catching my favorite band in the world at Ground Zero. So anybody there, come say hello, please.
Good stuff. I got one final question for you guys. Maybe Bob, you have the answer to this, or Michael. Did the band, the Allman Brothers, did they really have 2 meals a day at H&H sometimes, or just 1 meal a day? Because it almost sounded like they had breakfast there and dinner there. Did they go twice a day, really? Sometimes.
I think so.
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean,
I believe.
Listen. If you see the neighborhood, like where they were in the early days, from where they took the first picture at the first album cover, which is up on College Street, and you make your way downtown, it's a walk. It's a hefty walk. But they all lived in and around the downtown area, and the H&H was right there by wherever they were rehearsing or wherever they were hanging out, right up the street from Capricorn. So highly likely that they had several meals at different points during the time. That was, wake up, eat some mushrooms, play music, go get some food, come back, eat some mushrooms, play music, go get some food, kind of thing. They were living it. They were living it. Well, that's why the shroom is their symbol, is because it was an important part of their early development. Another reason I think they're the coolest band in the history of the world.
As were those brisket sandwiches from H&H, which I've had myself. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate the time. I'm sure we will all congregate again soon. More recaps coming soon down the pipe of recapping TTB shows for sure. Like, subscribe, do all those things. And we will talk soon, guys. Thank you to the band, the crew, TTB, everyone. We'll talk soon. Later, guys. Peace.
Thank you, Adam.
Thanks.